Fear me, I am deaf. Correction, I am deaf. Roguelikes. It's a genre that I enjoy, but has honestly become extremely oversaturated over the years, with everyone wanting to get a piece of that pie. It always seemed like there was some new roguelike coming out almost every week at one point. And who can blame developers? Roguelikes essentially offer seemingly unlimited replayability, as each run and attempt is designed to be completely different than the last. And with the continuous support of either community mods, or direct developer updates, or even both, the genuinely becomes a reality. That feeling of experiencing a new game for the first time is here in a roguelike, except amplified by the fact that each run you play is different, making the player more inclined and excited to play again in hopes of seeing something new, or taking the knowledge and game experience they just gained from the previous run into their next attempt. It's a genius idea for building an entire game around it, as I mentioned before, but it has become less of a unique concept over the years, with the market being so full. At this point, roguelikes have to have some extra draw to them, whether it be its art style, unique gameplay and gameplay mechanics, or a good story and world. Some roguelikes come and go, some don't even get off the ground, and some stand as untouched pinnacles of the genre. Games like Dead Cells, Slay the Spire, Risk of Rain, The Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, Hades, and Spelunky are some of the top games of this genre. This of course does not discount any other amazing roguelikes like Skull, Gunfire Reborn, Dead Estate, Moonlighter, Wizard of Legend, Downfall, and hundreds more games that have been released over the years. Every roguelike has its audience, sometimes a really dedicated one at that, so the lifespan of a good roguelike could be long, but the lifespan of a great roguelike can be even longer. My issue with roguelikes, as I stated before, is the fact that there's so many. I've played quite a few of them and experienced a lot that the genre has to offer, but very few tend to keep me around for long. Even playing the most popular ones tend to have me leaving after just a few hours of play. Like Dead Cells and Slay the Spire are both extremely popular, and although I don't deny that they're great games, they both didn't keep me enthralled for too long. Wizard of Legend was the first roguelike to keep me entertained for a long period of time after its first few hours. I even used to stream the game back when I used to stream on Twitch, but even that seemed to leave me hanging after a bit. Only Risk of Rain 1 and 2 and Gunfire Reborn have seemingly kept me hooked for all this time, as I even still play them to this day. But recently, there have been two new contenders that have come into the big battle royale that is the roguelike game genre. Those being Have a Nice Death and Deflector. Both two games of different style and gameplay, but have both swiftly become my roguelikes of choice as of late. The two and pretty much only things that are common between these two games are the fact that they are both in early access, but also seemingly have dedicated devs that listen directly to community feedback. One I feel has a bit more polish than the other, but both are great in their own right. So let's go ahead and, Huh? Oh, really? Well, I'm being informed that more than 80% of the channel's viewers are not subscribed. Please, consider liking the video or subscribing to help support the channel. I've been trying really hard to upload some quality content every week, so I'd love for you to stick around and have you join me for next week's venture. I really appreciate the support of all of my current subscribers, and the chance and attention for all of those who aren't. I love you guys. Let's jump back into the video. Starting off with Have a Nice Death, it's a game developed by Magic Design Studios, who had created Unruly Heroes back in 2019. It was received pretty well, and I could see some of their style influences from that game in their newest title. This game caught my eye in my Steam recommendations randomly one day, and I fell in love with the fact that the game was hand-drawn, so like every game that I seem to run into that's hand-drawn, I bought it immediately. I did briefly see a short article about it before buying it, and it stated the game had potential but seemingly lacked substance and content. When I first bought and started playing the game, I could absolutely see where this was coming from, but I had gotten the game after a recent content patch was announced. So by the time I had gotten the hang of the game and began getting good, there was more content and adjustments added in. This update also fixed many of the issues that not only I personally had, but the issues the community voiced as well. So enough housekeeping. Let's go ahead and start breaking this game down. In Have a Nice Death, you play as Death, who has gotten tired of working and decides to create the Sorrows, each one in charge of a specific department in Death Inc. to take over the majority of your work. After some time, Death slowly begins just falling away into his death job, but after letting his sorrows get the best of him, he's had enough, and he's looking to reclaim his power and get his company back under control. You'll progress through 5 different departments, slaying the rogue workers and sorrows along the way, and with the game having its gameplay being focused on fast and smooth combat, it makes dispatching enemies and fighting bosses a lot of fun to do. But before the player even gets to start their first run, the player is presented with the challenge system, a series of deals presented to the player that they can choose to sign. They sometimes include a random item, upgrades, or bonus currency for each run, with greater rewards being tied to more difficult challenges or having a higher price to pay. I really like this system, and other systems and other roguelikes that allow for elements like this. It gives the player some extra goals to try and complete each run, rather than just get to the end. This system fits in seamlessly in my opinion, and lays the groundwork for future updates that could include other challenges to show up in this list. I'm curious to see if they'll add more and what they'll come up with. Personally, I'd love to see something like kill 5 enemies without touching the ground, as it ties directly into the combat, and has the players thinking more about how to execute something like this. Continuing on, while playing through each run, you'll pick up spells and cloak attacks along the way, which act like secondary weapons to add to your current arsenal, alongside your scythe primary. It's also important to be mindful of which works best for you, as you're only able to carry 2 secondaries at a time. 2 spells, 2 cloak attacks, or 1 of each. It really depends on how you're tailoring your build with the upgrades you'll be getting from Mr. Osha. There are 3 different trees for upgrades that Mr. Osha can give you: red, blue, and yellow. Red being more centered on the scythe and cloak attacks, blue being more centered on defense and utility, and yellow being more centered on spells and mana. There are also upgrades that have downsides as well, which give you a bonus but forces you to choose from 2 downsides to come to effect, some being more detrimental than others, but still is an interesting take on the upside/downside style of items. Overall, what things you add to your arsenal during that run is rather dependent on the upgrades you get, or the items you start with in some instances. Getting a lot more spell damage and mana upgrades, maybe opt in for taking more spells. Cloak damage up, grab some cloak weapons. You can even just have a nice balance of the two, or even make other random builds with the upgrades you're given.
I like it, cut G.
Spellslinger build, in your face slashy build, tanky build,
Don't hit me, please!
build. Hell, you could just say fuck all that and just focus on having your build being more oriented on just using your scythe and forgo using your secondaries at all. Once you start getting an idea for your build, you can use your souls and prismium, the currency used in runs, to upgrade your weapons, spells, and cloak attacks in the control room, where this large guy Jacob resides. Prismium is also used to unlock new scythes for that run, with each one having different attacks and bonuses. There's an umbrella, and I swear this shit feels clean as fuck to use. Mary Papa combo in your ass. Each build idea that was placed in front of me felt viable and varied enough to have some fun with, but I did sometimes find myself leaning into just doing scythe builds with lifesteal, as lifesteal is an extremely powerful and valuable thing to have, and could possibly warrant being toned down in future versions, but this of course isn't really necessary. The reason lifesteal is so valuable is due to how damage interacts with your health bar. Whenever you take damage, you take a flat amount that lowers your HP, but you also take some damage that grays out part of your HP bar. Lifesteal can be used to heal the gray damage, allowing for the player to save up healing resources, known as anima, to help heal the rest of the damage. Anima act like health potions here, as they heal a portion of your HP, but in Have a Nice Death, there are 2 different versions that heal differently. Blue anima heals for a small amount and only heals gray health, while yellow anima heals for a larger amount and can heal past the gray health cap. Yellow anima are a bit more rare and require you to stack blue anima to get them, or get lucky by finding them around. I originally felt these to be so far and few in between of getting, but since the update, I feel there's a bit too many. But it seems that devs are looking to make adjustments to this, as the majority of the community opinion seems to be the same. Going back to the progression, just like other roguelikes, most of the early runs of a new player will involve experimentation, understanding mechanics, figuring nuances of the game, and unlocking things for future runs. There's a lot of options as of right now, and the developers are continuing to add more in the ways of spells, upgrades, and tools to grab in each run. You can even see everything you've unlocked and seen in each attempt in this chamber in the main hub, similar to how a few other roguelikes lay everything out in a visual fashion, like Dead Cells for example. Doing this allows for the player to see the fruits of their labor, and seeing it slowly light up over time feels really good. It's a great way to allow the player to have a visible representation of progress to see how they're progressing through the game, especially in a roguelike where all of your items and upgrades are lost between each run. Having to scroll through menus to see the specifics of items and unlocks is something that should be included, and here it was, but having this extra visual element of being able to see everything, of course without being able to inspect anything, is a great addition, and I wish more roguelikes did something like this. Along with this chamber in the hub, this is where you'll be able to interact with some of the friendly NPCs, which are employees at Death Inc. These are the employees that still hold allegiance to Death, like Harriet and Patrick, who play more of a supporting character role. Then there's Jacob and Mr. Osha, who we mentioned before, who have more gameplay significance by providing upgrades and such to the player throughout their runs. There's quite a few friendly faces that all have their own personality, but my personal favorite has to be Pump Quinn, Death's newest intern who works as his personal secretary. She's adorable! Seeing her around and interacting with her always has her bring up the most chipper of dialogue encounters from her. She's always so happy and loves the work that she does. Aside from the friendly NPCs, there are the not so friendly NPCs. The Sorrows and their Thanagers, which act as the bosses and mini-bosses of each area. For the first stage, they're the Sorrow Brad and the Thanagers Will Hung and Leon Clean. The second stage has a Sorrow Mr. Gordon Grimes and Thanagers Silma, X4H, and Richard J. Barron. The third stage has a Sorrow Mr. Hector Crank and Thanager Denzel King Dengu. The fourth stage has a Sorrow Max and the Thanager Candace. And the fifth and last stage has Sorrow Major Warren Plixcon and the Thanager Camille Flage. Each one of these bosses and mini-bosses are a joy to fight, and are honestly quite difficult. Fuck this cupcake! Is that a crab? Barrel. Oh, this Skidoo about to get it. This shit's a nightmare. Ah, don't touch me! Look, I'm gonna be real with you, Chief. Well, all the shit I've seen, you ain't scared. Ah! Each boss and Thanager's design ties directly into their designated department, which, although makes sense, feels like a nice bit of attention to detail. The Sorrows even all have many different unique pieces of dialogue at the start of their fights. In each of my runs, I don't think I've had any dialogue be repeated across my time of playing, and the devs are continuing to add more unique pieces of dialogue as well. It's a very small note, but dialogue being unique every single time does help make each run feel more distinct from one another, even if it's just as small as a skippable dialogue scene. Speaking of each department, each one is visibly distinct from one another, with unique enemies in each of them. Even if there are some that are reused, specifically with the addiction department, some at least have different attacks to make them feel different at least. With that, Have a Nice Death is a fantastic roguelike, and does deserve the attention of any and all people who are looking for a new roguelike to try. It is currently in early access, as I mentioned before, so there's going to be continued changes and updates down the line, and I look forward to seeing everything they have prepared. Now, this video is a double feature, so let's go ahead and jump into Deflector. Deflector is a bullet hell style roguelike with deflecting at the core of its gameplay and is being developed by Aerofist Games, a company based out in Barcelona. This title is their first big game they've ever developed, and honestly, so far so good. I of course have a few gripes with the game, but we'll get to those in a bit after we do a bit of housekeeping. I originally came across this game early on during its public availability, and I've seen it change, improve, and grow over the course of a couple of months. Deflector has 2 separate free demos that grant you rewards in the full game when you play and complete them, so there are 3 different versions of this game when you go looking for it on Steam. The demos are titled Deflector Specimen 0 and Deflector Specimen 1, and then the full game is simply titled Deflector. I went back and played both of the demos, unlocked the skins, and although they were very short, I felt like they allowed the player to get the gist of what the game has to offer. In Specimen 0, you only play through a shortened version of one of the worlds and fight one of the game's optional bosses, while in Specimen 1, you play through the tutorial area and then are tasked with surviving against constantly spawning waves of enemies until you die. Although the full game doesn't get as insane as Specimen 1, I feel that for those who wish to get a taste of Deflector, playing these will definitely give you that. As mentioned before, they are incredibly short, with Specimens 1 being the longest of the 2, allowing you to essentially continue its endless wave segment indefinitely, which makes sense since these are nothing more than demos at the end of the day. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start picking apart the main game, Deflector. I'm also going to preface this part by saying that I replayed the entire game to experience the first play experience for newer players after the major update that recently came out. Deflector has you assume control of a bioshell, which explores microscopic biomes during an experiment in search of a source of corruption that is plaguing them. With your AI guide, who teaches you the ropes of everything, you will venture forth through a series of levels, each with their own themes, enemies, music, optional objectives, bosses, and etc. One thing I really like about Deflector is the fact it's non-linear, allowing for the player to play through levels in whichever order they want. Each biome scales accordingly with the player based on if they were the first or second or third biome to be completed. With some of the unlockables, the order actually matters. Like being able to power this boat in the Toxic Sea requires you to at least play through the magnetic fields before it and grab this battery just before the final boss. There are other roguelikes that do this kind of thing, but I personally wish that it was more common in the genre. Being linear in level progression isn't a bad thing, it even has its own benefits, but I personally enjoy the non-linearity of random levels or being able to select the order I want to do them in. Back to Deflector. The game kicks off with a simple tutorial and tutorial world to get you into the swing of things, basically teaching you that each character has a primary attack, a deflect ability, a passive, and a special ability, and it also teaches you how to use the upgrade system, but we'll get to that later. After completing the tutorial area, you are brought into the hub, and here in the hub, the player can discover new DNA upgrades, general upgrades to improve run efficiency, change biocells, which are the characters, and later on take a look at the challenges to unlock new traits. You also get to pet Oogles, your transport between areas. 10 out of 10, Game of the Year. I now want to talk about the bioshells since this is the first area you'll be introduced to in the hub. Currently there are 4 playable bioshells, each with pretty distinct gameplay styles: Eradicator, Slasher, Gunslinger, and Spark. The Eradicator uses a boomerang that deals damage on the way out and on the way back. It can be deflected with your right click to keep it bouncing, and the Eradicator's skill grants you the ability to temporarily have 2 boomerangs throwing during its duration. The Slasher is the only melee class, but it is able to throw out its sword and call it back to deal damage from a distance if it needs to. The Slasher skill has you temporarily go invulnerable as you strike all nearby enemies. The Gunslinger has a gun that fires out bullets, but the more you shoot, the more your battery depletes. Once it does deplete, your fire rate decreases dramatically, effectively lowering your damage. To recharge the battery once it hits 0 or to gain charge to keep it from hitting 0, the player must use their deflect skill. The Gunslinger's special skill is to place a turret down that attacks any nearby enemies. The Spark, and personally my favorite of the bunch, has the player use their deflect skill to hit the orbs that orbit the player to blast them at the enemy. After sending out an orb, the player can then call all the orbs that are out back, dealing damage on their way back to the player. The Spark special skill has all the current orbs orbiting you orbit faster in a larger radius, and deal damage to anything they pass through. Each bioshell also has 3 different variants that augment how they work as well, which is a nice touch to allow people to have a bit more personalization for each run that they undergo. But personally, I just enjoy using the first variant for each bioshell. I also find that each bioshell having their 2 kit revolve around deflecting is well designed here, but the only one that doesn't have their abilities revolve around it is the Slasher, but it has other things to worry about that the other bioshells don't really have to. All of the classes have some unique skill and mastery to them to varying degrees, but I feel the Gunslinger is just objectively the best and the easiest bioshell to pilot. Every run I played, I melted bosses and melted enemies with my turret and primary attacks, and the developers have lowered the base damage and base HP of the Gunslinger to counteract this, but with how far back the Gunslinger can play with its quick attack speed, I very rarely felt any sort of challenge. Luckily, the other classes provide an adequate amount of uniqueness to allow for that difficulty to kick in, and each one is quite enjoyable to use. Of course, you don't start off with all of them unlocked, and unlock them over the course of your playtime, but one character I ran into I had a very particular gripe with when trying to unlock them. This may be a me thing, but I feel the Slasher has to be one of the most annoying ways of unlocking a character in this game. The Slasher is technically the first and easiest bioshell you would unlock, needing practically no prerequisites to unlock them, as you simply need to walk up to the bioshell pods, and your AI companion will explain the bioshells and give you the Slasher. My issue with this is that there's zero incentive or reason for the player to walk up to the pods, and could leave the player in a frustrated state when trying to figure out how to unlock the character. That was me. I had unlocked all of the other characters, completed almost every other challenge, and had hours upon hours of game time before I unlocked what was supposed to be the first extra character. The reason for this is to actually start playing the game, the player must proceed forward to the rest of the hub, so just holding forward will completely skip by this interaction. There's no reason to not just go straight as soon as you spawn. I simply accidentally walked this way and triggered the event. Other parts of the hub that the game wishes to teach you about takes place during your first visit, where you are directed about. But why is there nothing for this? If changing your bioshell is such an important facet of the game, and the Slasher is just going to be handed over to you, why not just have this interaction occur automatically after your first playthrough, when you attempt to walk out, or once you spawn? This is just a small complaint of mine, and it could easily be fixed. But again, this could just be a me thing. After you're fitted up with your drip, you can now go and get started playing the game, and this is where the game shines. Also, don't forget to pet Oogles on the way out. Deflector's gameplay is fucking amazing. Every failed run just has me running back to attempt again. There's never just one run and done whenever I play this game, which is something I tend to experience with many other roguelikes. It controls so well, and when I finally started getting a hang of the game's flow, I immediately started getting sucked in. From this starting hub, the player can choose one of the currently available worlds to start the run off, and we'll be revisiting here after each world. The worlds include the Toxic Waste, the Living Entrails, and the Magnetic Fields, and as stated before, they're all fairly unique. And holy shit, before we move on, I have to talk about how much I fucking love the music in this game. Take a listen to some of these bangers. Absolutely just chef's kiss. You progress through each world, taking on arena after arena and a branching map, grabbing upgrades, visiting shops, doing optional objectives if you so choose, all the way up to that world's boss. Complete each world and get to the final boss where you fight the corrupted core, and honestly, this fight is actually really fun. Its sweeping attacks and constant barrage of projectiles that can change color on a dime all compound to make a pretty well designed boss that plays off every mechanic the game has to try and overwhelm you. One moment you're trying to deflect a bullet and then this is the basic gist of the gameplay. And it goes even deeper once you take a look at how the upgrades work. As you progress through a run, you'll come across a mutation which acts as upgrades for your bioshell, such as a wave of fire pulsing from every time you deflect a bullet or every time you dash or leave behind bombs. Each upgrade is then placed on what appears to be a chain where you build a path towards these traits. Once you get a mutation in its vicinity, it'll become active and spawn other traits for you to continue building towards. The more of a single trait or mutation you have active on your DNA strain, the stronger it becomes, having you plan out which mutations you'll use, as well as figuring out which position is best for you to place it. Formulating your build is crucial, as you can't move mutations around once you have them down on your DNA strain. What upgrades you want to get, where you're going to place them, what traits are best to prioritize, and which traits do you stack are all some of the questions that come to mind when thinking about your build for that run. Of course, bad builds won't stop you from progressing, as the game is very skill oriented. Using your limited dashes, timing your deflects in between your primary attacks, and finding the small openings when your screen starts to look like this feels amazing once you start getting a hold of things. But once you do get a hold of the game and its mechanics, you are heavily rewarded for your mastery by being able to take more rigorous paths and opt in for doing more optional objectives in each run. And with these optional objectives, this is unfortunate where I feel the game begins to falter. First up, you don't get to see any of the challenges you've completed or have yet to unlock until you complete this mini-boss in Living Entrails, freeing this NPC. Having this be locked until the player does something optional is just bad, and on top of that, I was also very disappointed to find out that you are not able to fight this optional boss here again once you've defeated it the first time. A lot of the optional challenges are basically a one and done situation, where you're no longer able to undergo them again, which honestly is a shame. The only one that can be redone, it seems, is this mini-boss, where you use the battery you get in the magnetic fields to power a boat in the Toxic Waste. But I personally want to never fight this mini-boss again. The only mini-boss or unique challenge that's replayable is one of the most frustrating and poorly designed things in this game, in my opinion. So, let me break that down. This boss has you stuck on a raft where you must constantly dodge attacks until the enemy does a very specific attack in which you deflect a single bullet back into it to deal damage. Rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. This is the biggest issue I have with this game. Waiting. It's a massive pace killer since your normal attacks can't affect it, having you simply just dodge around and wait. There are other instances of waiting throughout the rest of the game as well. Each boss has moments where you just find yourself waiting, dodging attacks before the boss becomes vulnerable again. But at least it's just one attack, or has the player doing something that keeps the pacing up. The dodge patterns here in this mini-boss aren't even that bad, but it's just the fact that you can't do anything to the boss unless it's this specific instance. If you could at least attack the boss, this would be better. Have the deflected bullets deal extra damage, while your primary attacks deal less damage than normal. In fact, there's a boss that has a mechanic similar to this already in the game. In the magnetic fields, the boss here throws bombs that bounce around and make more bullets, and the only way to get rid of them is to deflect them back into the boss, dealing a pretty chunky bit of damage too. This is how the mini-boss should have been treated, instead of what it currently is, an optional frustration. But at the end of the day, despite my few complaints, I still love playing this game. There are those few things I hope the game improves on, but what I have right now is still really enjoyable, and I know that the game will continue to just get better from here. The game is in early access, and I can excuse a few misses as the game continues to develop, especially since the developers are trying to listen to what the community members talk about. More content is also coming, with a new biome being a part of the next update, and I'm super excited to play through it, see the boss, and hear its banger tracks. Overall, both Have a Nice Death and Deflector definitely appeal to similar yet different audiences, but lucky for them, I slided to both of their target audiences. Both of these games are available on Steam and have their links in the description, so check them out if these interest you at all. Deflector also has about 20 minutes worth of content split across 2 demos for you to try as well, which are also both down in the description. I honestly hope you enjoyed this video. It turned out a bit longer and bigger than I anticipated, so the delay on it felt necessary to make sure I got it to a decent enough quality for you all. Sadly, that makes 3 missed weeks for uploading this year so far, and I hope I can get better with this. I try to keep you all up to date on everything on Twitter and Instagram, so give me a follow over there if you'd like to keep up with me or the channel. If you enjoyed this week's video though, please consider subscribing, ringing the bell, and liking the video. I'm trying really hard to give you all banger videos every week, and it really does help me bring you all bigger and better videos. And as usual, my name is CrossVee, and I hope to see you all next week. Peace.